All right, well, let's get things moving. My name is Shane. I run the events over at 10 Capital Network, and we have a great quick pitch for you today. We have three amazing companies and two of our finest investors on the panel. If you have any questions during the session, please feel free to use our audience chat, and we'll do our best to get to those if we have time. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first panelist. Liam, if you want to come up and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Of course, happy to. And thank you so much for coordinating the event. Really excited to meet the companies you're hosting. My name is Liam Krutt. I'm an investment partner with Reinforced Ventures. We're a network of over 1,700 experts who help find the most overlooked opportunities in deep tech. When other funds invest in autonomous cars, we invest in autonomous trucks. When everyone's jumping on the protein folding bandwagon, we find opportunities for computational modeling of lipids and carbohydrates. Simply put, we invest where the pendulum hasn't swung.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Zamir, come on up and introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Zamir Shukho. I'm a GP of Vibranium VC Venture Fund. We are a Silicon Valley-based seed stage fund. We invest in B2B SaaS, and we like to see all kinds of things. We're industry agnostic, but we want the founders and the team to be in the US and compete here and have traction in the local US market. We're happy to support the teams afterwards. Our initial check is up to $500,000, and then we follow on during the Series A up to 1.5 million. So happy to connect with all of you and listen to great pitches today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And also, for our audience members, I will be running a poll after each of our companies present. So if you don't mind filling those out just to get your interest, especially if you're an investor, that would be great. And with that, let's just kick things off with our first company, Way. Bentley, you want to come up here and put your slides up? I'll get the timer out.
Okay, great. Here we go. I'm just going to do this. Okay, can everybody see the screen here?
Yes. Can you see my timer?
Yeah, perfect. Great. Thanks. Well, first, thanks for having me here. And thanks, Shane, and everybody at 10 for putting this event together. And nice to meet you all. I usually find that it's best to give a little bit of a story of the journey of how Way came to be before diving into the product itself. So I'll tell you a little bit about me and then how we got here, and then dive into the actual product and all of that we've done. So the story for me really started when I was in college. A professor of mine told me that 2/3 of people in this country were going to live a life of pain and suffering due to preventable chronic conditions. And that just stopped me dead in my tracks. I'm an Eagle Scout. I took an oath to do a duty to this country at a young age. And as sappy as that might sound, or as messy as things are like they are right now, I always took that very seriously. And so I knew that from that moment on, what I wanted to do with my professional life was to impact health. And so my first love actually was in body movement and functional movement, helping people move in alignment with their natural structures, and seeing how when they did, it would really make them happier. They report being happier and better to their spouse, their partner, their coworkers, their friends, the strangers on the street. And that gave me this huge, deep sense of reward. And so what I want to do with my professional life, actually, I wanted to be a doctor. My mentor was a doctor and an Olympic athlete trainer, and said, don't do it. It's not what you think it's going to be. You're going to have to care for people the way that the system wants you to, not the way that you want to. And so I went to the professional side of healthcare, and kind of where the original observation came from Way was, I was at KPMG, I audited Medicaid for the state of California. I went to Beckman Coulter, which is the first company that did blood testing on humans in a reliable, scalable way. About 85 years ago, at a young age, ran all of New York and was number one in the US, and realized that corporate healthcare probably wasn't going to be the way we were going to make impact and solve the problem. And so went to the venture side and started building companies, first with a VC-backed laboratory management company that grew from 0 to 400 million in ARR in less than 15 months, and ended up selling for a 9-figure sum. And then the next company realized the first one wasn't going to make a dent, and the next one was the focus on consumerization of health. And so it was a digital marketing agency that had amazing clients like Healthline.com, One Medical, MedHelp.org, Life Technologies, et cetera. It was an Inc. 500 company. But again, it was a great business, but it didn't make impact. And so I came back to this thing that I knew, which is that from studying the human body for most of my adult life is that nutrition is the single biggest factor to each person's overall health. And that's not really debated by pretty much every scientist, doctor, trainer, dietitian, anyone who studies the human body. And so on the side of my corporate and venture life, I was a trainer at Equinox. And one of the things I was taught by my mentor in school was, in order to truly make behavior shift that's lasting, you can't really ever tell somebody what to do and have it last. It might work for 3 or 6 or 12 months, but ultimately you have to help somebody uncover what they see and help them make the decision themselves to own and have agency over the decisions that they make. And so once that happens, then the shift lasts much longer. And so when I was at Equinox, in order to create emotional rapport and trust, to create a safe environment for neuromuscular mirroring to affect the movement patterns, it sounds really simple, but I bring clients in and I'd say, hey, Shane, how's your day? What did you do? How is the stress? How is your boss? How are the clients? How was that guy Bentley? Was he being a jerk? Blah, blah, blah. What did you eat for lunch? And invariably 3 things would happen. Clients would become aware of what they ate when they wouldn't have otherwise. 2, they immediately knew whether what they ate was good or not good for them. And we could talk about those labels. And 3, by 5, 6, or 7 o'clock at night or the next day, when I'd see them, they knew how their body felt as a result of what they ate. So they already knew pretty much everything. They just needed to become aware of it. And so I would focus on their functional movement patterns. They become more curious about things. I'd write down what they were saying, and we'd see these shifts. And about 6 years later, when I was starting on this path, I called my old clients, and over 80% of them had kept that shift. And that's a very high number. So now that I'd taken that experience, talked to intuitive eating dietitians and talked to behavior science experts from Columbia University and Duke University, as well as the best intuitive eating dietitians in the US, they all have the same observation of the path that we can get to create long-term shift in people's lives. And so that's really where Whey was born from. And so kind of diving into what Whey is now with a little bit of background. The problem that we're really solving is that restrictive diets fail. They fail 83% of the time or more. That there are over 120 million Americans who do a diet or weight loss program every year. It's a very, very big TAM. And the failure rate is extremely high. The way I say it is, if 83% of cars failed, wouldn't we all kind of stop and say, maybe I won't drive that thing? But people do this with diets, with nutrition, with the most important part of their life, and they continue to do it. And so consumers are actively seeking change. They're just met with suboptimal choices that consistently fail. And so ultimately what we're doing to shift this paradigm is to introduce a product that's based upon intuitive eating practices, which is a proven modality that has over 150 clinical studies behind it, as well as behavior science, which is the bedrock form of behavior science that we operate within, is cognitive behavioral therapy model. Thoughts lead to emotions and feelings that lead to behaviors that reinforce the thoughts. We get behind the thoughts and emotions and feelings behind the behaviors, and then we ask, which we'll talk about in a second, magic wand questions, which is actually a dialectic behavioral therapy or addiction therapy modality. And ultimately what that does is it creates a picture in the person's mind. Like, imagine finding peace in your relationship with food in your body. What would that feel like? What would that look like? What would you notice in your surroundings? And as that picture becomes clear, the thoughts and emotions start mapping towards that picture, and then thus the behaviors follow. And so that's really what's happening with Whey. It's really important to note upfront what we are and what we are not. What we are is really creating this safe, non-judgmental space, because only in parasympathetic nervous system can absorption into the mind and the shift in the behavior really happen. It can't happen when people are in sympathetic or stress state. We are also accessible, affordable option at $6.99 a month or $49.99 annually. We want to make sure that it's always accessible, regardless of the economic environment, and think that we priced it accordingly. We are also operating within proven models, proven efficacious frameworks that we're working within with CBT and with intuitive eating. What we are not is we are not using shame-oriented cycles around weight, which have a very low success rate. We're not triggering people into the restrict binge cycle. So almost every restrictive diet, the reason why they fail is because when we go through restriction, that creates deprivation or disconnection from the body. When that deprivation happens, it's just a matter of time before that triggers into a binge eating cycle. That binge eating cycle will happen, and then shame or guilt will arise from the binge eating. That shame or guilt will then trigger restriction, and the cycle keeps repeating. And so what we do is we make sure meticulously that we're not triggering any of that. So the product itself works within 3 major pathways. They start off the journey creating their peace point. Then they go through 54 core modules, 67 total modules that are 2 to 8 minutes long that operate ultimately around the sole goal within Way, which is a non-diet culture or non-diet looking goal, which is, again, that peace point. What would finding peace in your relationship with food and your body look like, feel like? What would you notice in your surroundings? What would you be eating? How would you feel about your body, et cetera? And so we take them through lots of different areas of the process, but what we'll do to extend lifetime as we grow, don't have this implemented yet, but what we're looking at is how to create sessions in real time and using generative AI in order to create really customized learning so people can uncover the thoughts and emotions and feelings behind their behaviors. We have an amazing team that has, the principal product designer for Headspace is our designer. One of the lead iOS engineers for Square is an engineer for us, as well as Kara Harpstreet, I think, most importantly, one of the most involved people on our team. And she's an intuitive eating thought leader in the United States, one of the top ones that's recognized amongst dietitians. As well as amazing investors. We have a fund that's an investor. So Dan Burns, who you see on the lower right there, but Julie Miller, behavior scientist from Dan Ariely's School of Advanced Hindsight at Duke, as well as Marta Shea Sador, who's quadruple board certified psychiatrist from Columbia University, and Esther Dyson, who's one of the more legendary investors on the angel side. The traction, I think, is actually what's most impressive from Way. We've seen an increase in retention from an already high retention rate at 45% when we launched into Q4 and into earlier this year at 78% retention. We've had over 2,400 customers. It's actually closer to 3,000 now, and we're already generating a positive ARPU to CAC ratio with a gross margin around 55.8%. But we think we can get that to 87.5%. We're raising a $1.15 million round. We've already raised 920 of that. We actually just raised from Scale VC, closed earlier this week. And the predominant use of these funds is to get scale, ultimately, get some more distribution, get distribution higher. Our goals are to get to 145,000 in MRR and 1.7 million in ARR by the time we've gotten through this funding round, or by the time we've distributed all of these funds and deployed them. And that's it. So open to questions and thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you, Bentley. Zamir, you want to go ahead and start us off with questions?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bentley, for the presentation. I love the story, the path that took you to get here, and the product. I think it's important and amazing. I've done I didn't do the dieting myself, but I worked with a nutritionist, and we had a similar approach that it was not like forbidding me to eat anything, but rather balancing it out. Let me ask you this now. It seemed at some point of the presentation that this looks like more of like an educational platform. Is this what it is? Do you educate people, or do you also help them keep track of what's going on, what they eat, etc.? Like, what is the functionality beyond behind what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, it's a really good question, I think, Zamir, and I would break it into 2 parts if I can understand it too. Like, so is it an educational platform or is it a tracking platform effectively? And it's important to distinguish the methodology that we're using is intended to be non-triggering. And that's it seems subtle for those that are becoming familiar with what we do, but it's extremely important in blind user testing and user testing in every which way. As soon as something looks, smells, or feels like a diet tracker, a food tracker, a food logger, anything that looks like a diet, we've lost consumers because of the pain. Again, the way that I'd say it is 1 in 4 people who do a restrictive diet get an eating disorder. 35% of people get disordered eating patterns. If you do a restrictive diet, 60% of the time you'll have either an eating disorder or disordered eating. And anybody that's affected by that, or in your social circle, which almost everybody knows somebody that's had an eating disorder or disordered eating pattern, those people, anything that looks like that, we have to make sure that it's clean out of the product. And so the tracking piece, to answer that piece first, we don't have anything that looks like tracking in there. It will, going back to kind of reverse order of answering the question, the education is more of the piece, but it's not education like we're telling you what to do ever. What we are doing is we're asking questions that help people. It's Socratic. So it's helping people uncover what they already know within the cognitive behavioral therapy format, but using intuitive eating, which is a 10 principle framework that walks people through finding peace in their relationship with food, honoring their hunger, honoring their cravings, and learning how to listen to their body. And so that's ultimately kind of, I don't know if that helps answer it. We're more of an education, but it's self-exploration education versus being us didactically telling somebody what to do. We're just guiding them to understand more about themselves. And that's why it has such a high, I didn't mention this, but the efficacy of whey, 73% of people, 73.5% notice that they're thinking differently about how they eat, or they're actually eating differently at the grocery store or restaurant in the first week.
So the second question I have here is, now you've signed them up, they start answering some questions. How much of this content is customized? Because everybody has different bodies, so they like different foods. So you have algorithms, and you have this format of communication with them, which also helps to change their behavior. But how much of that is customized in the end? How much of that is manual or done by any specialist on the back end, or it's all automated and there is like 150 different scenarios that can happen?
Yeah, exactly. It's a great question. So right now we have 67 total sessions. 54 of those are core modules. 4 of them are introductory modules, and 9 of them or 6 of them are into that place of reflection exercises around their peace point. It's a curriculum currently, and that is a current thing. That is not the future. The future will be more personalized, but that's where we wanted to create a curriculum, because we can then say that I know that if we talk about mindful shifts, in order for you to unlearn the body image that's perpetuated by diet culture that is triggering most people into the restrict binge cycle, they think that they want a body image, they go this direction to get it, they go into restriction, and that causes that restrict binge cycle. When that happens, ultimately we want to walk people through a process of understanding their self-talk, understanding where the diet culture images exist, understanding what shame is, the definition in the Brene Brown sense of being an external, and a feeling of unworthiness, of love, belonging, or connections, etc., versus guilt, and understanding how guilt is actually based in values, and ultimately bringing them back down to what are your values. So that's a curriculum that we can teach, and that's what we're currently teaching. Eventually, where it gets to is 2 points of where we can use AI and personalization. One is being able to triage people into sessions that are specific to their behavior and what they've experienced. And 2 is actually creating in real time using GPT or another form of machine learning to be able to actually create real time sessions for them. And so that's where I think it goes, but we're not there right now. We're in a curriculum, if that answers that question.
Great. Liam, I want to make sure you get to ask a question or two there too. So feel free.
Sure, appreciate it. And thank you, Bentley. I'd like to better understand the product, I guess. So could you walk me through maybe what a user experience might look like on a given day? Like what would be an example of a thought plus an emotion, kind of through that someone might feel with breakfast on a given day?
Yeah, so I think that what I would probably do is start from the top, because I think it seems to be the most enlightening, and it's intentionally structured the way it is. So first, we're bringing people in and we're relating to them, helping them understand that we get that they've probably been in weight loss programs, diet programs that have failed before. We don't kind of tell them that we understand them. We just show them through what we say and focusing on the relationship with food. But then we jump straight into the first session, even before registration, before the paywall. And I'll ask you this question. It's a very important first step, which is, what was the first food rule you were taught when you were young? So I'm actually asking.
It was probably eating a significant portion of vegetables with emphasis on broccoli.
Perfect. That's the number 2. Number 1 is finish everything on your plate. That's the number 1 response worldwide, we find, and doesn't matter what culture people come from, 58% of people say that. Number 2 is eat your veggies, or you have to eat your veggies before you get dessert, et cetera, et cetera. So the next question off of that is, who taught you that? A parent, a teacher, a family member? Where did you learn that from?
Parent.
Yep. Most 80-90% of the time. And then the next question is the behavioral loop close. How aware are you of how that food rule has shaped how you eat today? Very aware, somewhat aware, not aware at all.
Very aware.
You're very aware. Okay, so you're very aware. Some people might be somewhat aware, some people might be not aware at all. And so now we're creating this cognition around this food rule that goes back to the origin of the relationship with food. And then now this is where it becomes self-exploration, educational. What do you do with that? For many people, what we're trying to create is a thought loop. So now they're going throughout their day, they're asking themselves, is that affecting what I'm eating? How is it shaping what I'm eating? And it sticks in the mind. There's new science that Marta Shea from Columbia says, where the new science is showing that once a question has been received by the brain cannot ignore it. It has to understand how to organize, handle it, or otherwise answer it at that moment in time. And until it does, and certain questions like this really go deeper into it. So we go into the pathways. And I think that the question you're asking around breakfast, for example, would be, we're not going to go after the meal time specifically, because that's part of what a lot of the things like in my
And we can keep it to broccoli. So like, I love broccoli. I've had broccoli 3 times this week. Let's say I'm having broccoli during lunch. I assume I have this app open. Like, what's the dialogue there between me and Wei?
Yeah, so it's ultimately going to be based upon the curriculum of what that will probably fit into, like session 2 in body feels is what eating so your body feels good. So it's asking you, what was the last food that you ate that made your body feel good? Well, for you, it would be broccoli, let's say, right?
Sure.
And so if it was that, then the question is, what are other foods like broccoli that also you think might make your body feel good? And now you're learning how to ask yourself and your body again. Power versus Force, David Hawkins, who wrote the book Orthomolecular Psychiatry with Linus Pauling, would say the study of the body is that the body is the most intelligent, efficient system that we've ever studied, more than any rocket, any electric car, any computer, etc. We're walking around with it all day, and are you listening to it? So the question being, what like broccoli would make your body feel good? Your body actually knows the answer to that question if you learn how to listen to it. So what we want you to do is start writing that down and then experiment with that, see if that's right. And so over time, what happens is you can see the relationship with not just broccoli, but the things outside of broccoli that make your body feel that good, that give you, and then that goes back to the value. What do you value? What do you want? Do you want mental clarity? Do you want energy? Do you want to have a physique look? Well, let's understand why you want that physique to look that way. Because as that relationship shifts, then we can start getting to a better place of ultimately building your actions and your behaviors on something that aligns with who you are.
Shane, being respectful of time, if I can get my second.
We're deep into it. Yeah, no, I love the questions though. This is good.
If you have one more quick question, I think that's fine.
Yeah, I'll super quick. So 78% retention, very impressive. Once someone's habits are improved over a 6 to 8 week period, once their microbiome is set over 1 to 2 week period, how do you keep people using your app after that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that the way that we look at the future of the product, and it's really a future of the product question, because we have 67 sessions currently, and we're expanding to 162 in the next 6 months. But the main thing is the relationship with the body, the relationship with food are the longest and deepest relationships we'll have in life. And per the Harvard study on adult development, relationships are the most important predictor, or the best predictor of the quality of or your best predictor of your health and happiness throughout your life. If we're doing our job, we're helping people through the relationship with food and their body as their life changes. You get married, you have kids, you get divorced, you go to college, you get a new job, you move to a new city. Those are all shifts that will happen in the relationship with food and the relationship with the body. And if we're doing our job, then we're serving people at each one of those points. So I think that's how we extend the experience into also to education, true education, kind of what Zamir was talking about, helping people to explore different areas of their life that they wouldn't otherwise even realize to ask.
Thank you, Bentley.
Great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Zamir. Thanks, Shane.
Yeah, we'll make connections if you guys want to talk further as well. But thank you so much, Bentley. We'll be moving on to the next company. So bring up Cyto Agents. I think Roy's here.
Great, thanks. Okay, so we are Cyto Agents. Our company is a clinical stage therapeutics company that is developing a drug to treat and prevent cytokine storm, or what is cytokine release syndrome. Where we are right now in terms of the company is we have completed our phase 1 clinical trials with our drug and are essentially just received it later may proceed from the FDA to move into our phase 1b/2a clinical trial, which will, at the end of which we'll have human POC for proof of concept for the efficacy of our drug within our patient population. And that's essentially what we are raising funds for today. Let me move to the next slide. Before I sort of jump into kind of the problem cytokine storm and how we at CytoAgents address it, let me tell you a little bit about the company. CytoAgents was formed in 2018 by Teresa Whalen, who's our CEO as well as our founder. Teresa has a long history in a long experience in healthcare entrepreneurship and over 20 years of experience both building and exiting companies. She's also recognized by EY as a winning woman entrepreneur. Joined our CSO is Jody Krega, who is a PhD from the University of Pittsburgh, who is focused on immunology and has been with the company since the beginning, since 2018, and is very well versed in all the major pathways of inflammation, and specifically has developed all the data packages essentially for the mechanism to elucidate the mechanism of actions for our particular molecule. Art Bordolino is our Chief Medical Officer. He comes to us with about 20 years of experience in drug development at Novartis and Pfizer, as well as some other smaller therapeutics companies. He has shepherded drugs through the clinical trial process, both in early stage as well as late stage. Cosentyx, as well as Ilaris, are some of the drugs that he has been involved in. Myself, I'm the CFO. I've actually come from Boston Consulting Group, but was most recently the COO, CFO, and a founder of Cleo Pharmaceuticals, which was a spin out of Yale, doing synthetic immunotherapies. Before I leave this page, I do want to sort of highlight also that our advisory board consists of many folks within this inflammation space, but also within the CAR T cellular therapy space, where we are targeting our initial indication for our drugs. Dr. Stan Marks, who is the chairman of UPMC, is actually also the chairman of our company. UPMC is going to be one of the sites for our next phase of our clinical trials. And Matt Fragault is the head of Mass General Cancer Center and oversees essentially their cellular therapy program, and has been instrumental in helping us define the challenges that folks in the CAR T space face, which is the space where we are pursuing our initial indication. So what is cytokine release syndrome, or cytokine storm, more popularly known, and why is it a problem? Cytokine release syndrome is essentially an overreaction by the immune system, whereby the body overproduces and doesn't downregulate sufficiently cytokines, which leads to immune hyperactivation, which essentially as a result of the body essentially attacking itself, and leads to acute systemic inflammation, multi-organ failure, and in rare cases, patient death. It's a very dangerous condition that is actually triggered by many, many different kinds of indications. So you can have CRS that's caused by infectious disease, such as COVID-19 or flu. It can be caused by autoimmune diseases. It can be caused by trauma. And it can even be caused by therapeutics in the case of the most recent sort of immunotherapies, which are designed to gear up the immune system to fight off, for example, cancer, which then ultimately leads to, if it is not managed well, cytokine storm if it's successful. Where we are choosing to focus in terms of our initial indication is within the CAR T space, essentially cytokine storm generated by CAR T. But we believe that if we are able to demonstrate effectiveness within CAR T, there's no reason why we cannot be expanded out into other indications and other spaces. So focusing in on CAR T itself, just to give a sense of how serious the problem is. Yes, CAR T is essentially a cellular therapy that is designed where you take the patient's immune cells and re-engineer them to essentially target particular diseases, in this case, cancer and certain leukemias, in the case of Yescarta, which is the most popular and also most widely used CAR T therapy. In CAR T, with Yescarta in CAR T, which is a very effective essentially in treating these cancers, the CRS incidence rate is close to 90%. Effectively, practically all patients who get CAR T as a treatment will have CRS of one level or another, and that in itself leads to usually a neurotoxicity or an ICANN. But any grade of CRS that occurs essentially requires hospitalization. So effectively, CAR T is basically an inpatient a treatment which requires over 14 days of hospitalization, and in a third of the cases requires ICU admission. So while CAR T is effectively a very effective treatment, it is also a very costly one, both from the treatment itself, but also from actually administering the treatment. The current standard of care for treating CRS within CAR T, essentially, you have two choices. One is either you treat it with TOSI, which is a monoclonal antibody that's targeting the IL-6 receptor. So a very specific, you try to essentially address a very specific cytokine within the cytokine cascade. It happens to be a very important cytokine, but it's a singular cytokine. And then usually, or you use corticosteroids, which effectively shuts down the immune system. It's very effective at stopping cytokine production, but it also essentially opens up patients to further infection. So essentially, you have a bit of Goldilocks problem when it comes to treating CRS in CAR T and more broadly. And neither TOSI, which is very specific, does a little bit too little, or dexamethasone, which does a little bit too much, are really optimal solutions. What we're providing with our molecule, the CT-1681, is effectively a steroid-sparing solution to prevent and treat CAR T. The way that CT-1681 is different from other drugs is that it targets the EP4 receptor, which is it activates the EP4 receptor, which essentially downregulates the NF-kappa B pathway, which essentially is the pathway that's most responsible for a broad range of cytokine productions. So rather than doing what TOSI does, which is target a specific cytokine or try to stop a specific cytokine, we're essentially going after the body's natural way of tamping down cytokine production overall. And we're doing it, and that EP4 receptor is actually a very good receptor because it's actually targeting the most important immune cells involved in the cytokine sort of cascade, which is T cells and within the blood and the lung area. And so by targeting that particular pathway, we have the effect of essentially downregulating a broad range of cytokines that are all involved within the cytokine storm. So as you can see with the column on the middle, the green one, we essentially are able to reduce cytokine production across over 20 different CRS inducing cytokines. And those are the same cytokines that are involved in T, they're involved in CAR T CRS, CAR T ICANS, as well as bispecific CRS. What's fantastic about our molecule is that while we reduce, we don't actually, while we diminish and we downregulate, we don't actually shut down the cytokine production. We essentially bring it back into the normal range of a healthy range of where the immune system should be. So, you know, we've done, this is essentially a compilation of all our data that we've pulled together within our in vivo and in vitro experiments within our preclinical studies. Probably the most specific thing to show that is that we've actually demonstrated in vivo both that we are able to reduce lung inflammation in a cytokine release model, which is probably within mice, which is essentially the most, in an influenza model, which is essentially the most translatable model for showing that you can essentially address CRS. And also important is that we've shown that for CAR T itself, that while we are able to reduce the cytokine storm and the sort of the positive feedback loop around cytokine production, we don't actually interfere with CAR T efficacy, meaning the CAR T therapy is able to sort of proceed with the killing of the cancers, but but it doesn't generate an out of control immune reaction. We believe that by solving the cytokine release syndrome within CAR T, we were able to address the specific issue of both making CAR T safer, but also moving CAR T from an inpatient setting where 90% of the folks have to get hospitalized to an outpatient setting where folks can take the CAR T, take our drug, and essentially be on their way, which will allow us to reduce essentially the cost of CAR T treatment by roughly take away about 50% of the cost of the treatment itself, which is hospitalization, thereby making it much more available to patients because it becomes an outpatient setting, and the throughput for hospitals to provide the treatment is increased, but also by increasing the safety of the treatment overall, therefore allowing more patients to come in and be able to receive CAR T and allow CAR T to be expanded into other indications. CRS has been the #1 problem that has held back essentially CAR T from achieving its full market potential. If you look back in 2017 when CAR Ts first started coming out, folks predicted that the market was going to be growing by 50%, but because of CRS and because of the limitations around safety, around requiring it to be an inpatient treatment, it's only grown by about 30%. We think that by solving the CRS problem, we can unlock essentially the potential of this market and therefore see a huge growth in the application of CAR T. And this problem is not, as I had mentioned before, is not just something that CAR T faces. It's something that every new immunotherapy that's coming out right now faces. All the CAR Ts have CRS problems. All the bispecifics, which are essentially next generation immunotherapies that are going to compete with CAR Ts, have CRS problems. Even gene therapies, for a different reason, have CRS problems because the way that you get the genes introduced into the cells for gene therapy, it requires viral vectors, which essentially can trigger the CRS response. So we feel like we're an enabling drug for all these therapies. If you were to kind of look at or think of a parallel, think of Neupogen essentially from Amgen, where essentially Neupogen allowed essentially the cancer therapies to progress because it dealt with the safety issues around white blood cells. As I had mentioned before, we had finished our complete phase 1 trial with no clinically significant side effects. This is a healthy volunteer trial of 24 patients. And now we are moving into our phase 1b/2a trial. The 1b essentially is a 36 patient enrollment, which will allow us to both confirm non-CAR T interference within our patient population, but also set a dosage range. We are cleared by FDA to go all the way through 2A once we've set that dosage range, which would give us human POC and lead to a registrational trial if there was success. The 1B is expected to be completed within 12 to 16 months, and the 2A would require about 16 to 18 months. I won't sort of get into this, but this is our clinical trial design. It's very flexible, and just to sort of get a sense of how quickly we will be getting answers to our questions. It's a 15-day treatment window, and once we're able to treat a cohort, we can move on to the next sort of dosage level, and we expect to finish this trial within 12 to 16 months. We are currently raising a $15 million round to do this trial, the 1B trial. We are halfway subscribed and going to do initial close. We have within our syndicate some very well-known pharma folks. John Euler, who is the CEO of BeiGene, will be joining the round, along with a number of other entrepreneurs actually from the local Pittsburgh area, some who have done recent exits within pharma. So I'm going to stop right there because I noticed I've gone very far, but open it up for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Roy. We have time for a few questions. I know we are technically at the end of the 15 minutes, but I'll let Zamir and Liam ask a few. Zamir, if you want to start us off again, feel free.
Sure. Thank you, Roy, for the presentation. I want to give a little bit of feedback first. So I'll put this in this chat. So I look at pitches almost every day, and I understand that, in pharma medical field, things are a little bit different than typically in your software startup pitches, but it would be important to not spend a lot of time on the product itself, because we've seen a little bit about the team and a little bit about the market, and almost 12 minutes it was about what the product will be and what kind of problem it will be solving. So there should be a little bit more balance about the presentation itself, and a lot of ground was not really covered. And I understand you're still in the early stages, but it would be also very good to see that you have a business perspective, not just the scientific side of the project, but also you understand how this can become a business, how this will be operated, what would be a go-to-market strategy, what kind of partnerships you plan to build, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of this business side of it was not covered at all, even in the plans. It would be very good to see, because you do have a strong team, and I see that there's a lot of, scientific research and knowledge goes into that, but the success of the company is about, not just the product, but also the business side of it. So I was missing out a little on this part, and that would be my feedback for now. And I'll let Liam maybe ask a question.
Thank you.
Sure, appreciate that. So let me see if am I on mute? No, okay. One thing I was hoping to better understand was the intuition around blocking the EP4 receptor. So with the redundancy in molecular biology and EP4's role with certain cytokines, like how are you getting a down regulation kind of across the board? It almost seems too good to be true. What's the intuition there?
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, in many ways, we do feel that EP4 and the kappa beta pathway is the kind of magic pathway. And the intuition really is that this is the pathway that regulates a broad range of the cytokines, the production of cytokines. We're not targeting any specific receptor. We're not targeting, we're not trying to block off any particular cytokines, but we're trying to get at the body's sort of natural pathway for, or those cells' natural pathway for essentially down-regulating the cytokines in general as a range. So, and this is also in many ways why the singularly specifically targeted cytokines, the monoclonal antibodies, are not particularly effective. Folks who, for example, the intuition behind doing TOSI is that IL-6 is a very important cytokine, but it's a singular in terms of kind of at the very beginning of the cascade. Let me sort of bring this up if you don't mind. Here, and you'll see that it's probably one of the most important in terms of at the very beginning in terms of the cytokine release. But once it's done, it's if you don't catch it at the right moment, then other cytokines take over and it starts to spill out, and that's essentially why TOSI isn't necessarily effective. It's effective if you can administrate it when you need to at the right moment and catch it right before. But our approach is really much more it's sort of broad in terms of addressing production as a whole of cytokines, which is where the EP4 receptor plays a part. And also important to note, is that we are activating. We're not blocking. We're agonizing. We're not just trying to block or sequester particular cytokines.
Sure, and it might be helpful to maybe go into more detail then on the origin for how 16A1 was discovered. Are there any projects you guys have for like in silico optimization for the PK/PD? Do you have animal data we could dig into?
Oh, definitely.
Feel free to answer any one of those three.
Absolutely, we have a full set of data in terms of in vivo and in vitro data on all those cytokines. So the mechanism of action is very well elucidated. Where the molecule came from, there was actually it was a molecule that had been looked at prior and was being developed actually for influenza initially. And by a group of scientists that did a very good job of doing kind of the scientific work of understanding the mechanism of action, but didn't do a very good job in terms of clinical development. To your point, Zamir, I mean, in many ways they were pursuing the science too much and not pursuing clinical development. Where we took essentially their research and shifted the target from influenza to CAR-T, where we saw a fast path through the clinic, more acute need, and a place where where the population was easily recruitable, and that's kind of our value add to this story of the molecule itself. Jody, who I mentioned was our CSO, had worked on the molecule from the previous company, and so we had inherited her as well as many of the investors from the previous company, because they saw that a shift in clinical strategy was what was needed, and because of that, we think we can get to a registrational trial within 2 years, and that's lightning speed for drug development.
Okay.
Great. With that, like I said before, we'll make connections if necessary afterward. Roy, thank you so much for presenting, and we'll bring up our last company, Augmented Training.
Okay. So Scott McLeod, retired Army officer, 31 years doing operations and training, primarily preparing soldiers for combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as providing disaster and emergency support to FEMA Region 6. And we've got Dr. Scott Smith, who is a licensed psychologist and the founder of the company, acting professor at Texas State University, and established the first AR/VR lab in the state of Texas. He's been researching and publishing articles on the effects of immersive training for about 20 years. So if we could, we'll go ahead and run through these slides real quick and give you an overview of our product, and start with the problem and the solution. So bottom line is almost all companies are struggling with how to train people. Time, funding, resource constraints prevent companies from achieving the training standards they want. They use outdated training modalities. It's very expensive and very time consuming. I just retired 4 years ago from the Army. The Army does not have an enterprise solution yet for training. We are in a deal right now with Allied Universal. They are the largest security company in the world, 800,000 employees. They serve more than 1,700 hospitals. They do not have an enterprise solution for training. So the bottom line is we know the problem is real. And I want to focus a lot on this because I think when you talk to folks about AR, VR, people believe that it's kind of come and gone. What we would tell you from feedback from talking to major U.S. hospital systems, almost one every 2 weeks, we have not run into a single U.S. hospital system that has an enterprise solution. And so it is a real problem. It's not going away. And when we talk about the metaverse, what we're really talking about is how we integrate this technology into these organizations to help them overcome these training and resource constraints. So on the solution, what AR VR does is it allows you to screen and evaluate training, deliver it on a learning management system that is cloud-based, and basically takes your training abilities and vastly increases them. It does that because you can screen and evaluate personnel. You can train to their specific gaps in knowledge using data and analytics. And you get an effect that's pretty phenomenal at a much lower price. We actually put a use case example here. Large Chicago hospital system had a training audience of 1,000 doctors, nurses, and techs spread across multiple geographic locations throughout Chicago. They were only able to train them on mass casualty every 2 to 3 years for a cost of $750,000. For $60,000, they are now conducting the same training. So this is a no-brainer. And they are actually an example of a large organization who is trying to figure out how do we integrate this technology into our organizational training strategy.
And Scott, I got a customer testimony last week from Dr. Reagan from that Chicago hospital. They unfortunately had a mass casualty event And she was able to observe her staff respond to that. And she said verbatim, it was the most efficient they've ever responded to an event. It was because of the amount of training they were able to receive through our platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Scott. And we had another doctor from one of our customers is Kaiser Permanente on the West Coast. An ER doctor went through our mass casualty training using his son's headset at home, and he said it was as realistic as live mass casualty events that he's worked on. So we know it's real. We know that many large organizational leaders haven't used the technology yet, but they are slowly coming around, and they are reaching out to organizations like ours to find out, hey, what is this? How do we put this into play inside our organization? So with that, I want to go ahead and hand this off to Dr. Smith and let you listen to some of his expertise as he explains the solution.
Yeah, so over the last 15 years, I've been studying simulations and their impact on human performance. And we've also spent a significant amount of time evaluating both quantitatively and qualitatively training solutions, first in emergency management and first responders. And every single one, 100%, the return on investment was extremely problematic because they had no idea how an individual's performance was when they went through those live trainings. And so we knew we didn't want to be a VR content company. We wanted to be a learning management company. So we built the Hero platform, and it hosts all of our trainings, both gamulations, and I'll get to that in a minute, and VR, because we just didn't want to be just VR. But it allows immersive, realistic training environments. We have telepresence and multiplayer. The trainer can go in and observe their trainees going through the training and communicate to them in real time about errors that they're making. You get individualized feedback, you get group feedback, you get organizational feedback, and you can also begin to tell what optimal performance looks like. We have gamification to increase user retention. And our next version of the platform will have a playback feature where you can view your real-time movement through the virtual reality, both with a trainer or as yourself. And then we'll have advanced metrics with eye tracking. And this is going to be a game changer where you can tell an individual's stress level and cognitive load. So when they go through the simulation, we'll be able to identify exactly where either the stress was too much or where they cognitively shut down, and then begin to tailor solutions for enhancing their performance moving forward. We'll also have an authoring tool coming out here in the next year as well, to where you can begin and pick down, I want this scene, I want a bus crash scene, I want this many patients with this injuries, these psychological profiles, these stress levels, and then it just deploys in the simulation itself. The market, total addressable market is massive. Training in general is a massive market. The VR market is in its infancy. There are not a lot of training specific VR companies. There's a lot of VR content companies, and there's even less VR companies that have a platform itself. But as you can see, corporate training is $487 billion, about 2030, excuse me. Emergency management market is $163 billion a year, 5.1 billion in training in hospitals. And we projected our sales from last year to this year. It's going to increase by 400%, and we'll get to that in a little bit too. Our current trainings that we offer, we built the first active shooter mass casualty training in the country, and we have various versions of that mass casualty training. We have code department training, which is a city of Austin municipality department that goes and evaluates risk and assessment for residential and commercial properties. We also have mechanical machine training for first responders as well, and ambulances and large, what's called an ambus, which is like an 18-wheeler ambulance that's deployed in these large scale events. A lot of people don't get the opportunity to train on those things. Our current trainings that are being on our pipeline is hazmat training, workplace violence. Scott had mentioned Allied Universal. They are really wanting workplace violence training. They have significant incidents of staff injuries and legal issues around that. We also are going to begin incident command and then active shooter for school systems. The current training for teachers, administrators, and staff is a PowerPoint presentation. We have an active shooter situation happen man, it seems like every week. And the training that is offered is extremely limited. So we're wanting to address that as well. And that's the school safety pilot project that we're having. We have a lot of partners in the Texas area, Texas Education Agency. I Love You Guys does all the training currently in the United States. They are wanting to partner with us to develop the pilot and to possibly do their entire e-learning management system to move it from a very online didactic training to more gamulation VR stuff. So we have that partnership, which is a pretty significant one. Our team, like I said, is retired Colonel Scott McLeod, myself, Grayson Lawrence, who is part of my partner in the lab for the last 15 years in the research. He runs all the UX experience and programming in terms of the VR development. And George Natakis is a 12-year software development engineer who has developed our third version of our platform, and we'll be working on the next one here shortly. Our advisors, Jim Hoover, Keith Noble, Robert Dix, all have a significant background in this space. Jim Hoover exited his company, Alchemy, at $500 million. Keith Noble helped us build some of the EMS training. We have other subject matter experts on our advisory board. One in particular, AJ Redmere, he is one of the individuals that helped build the first Xbox. He's been in Lucasfilms and Microsoft, a long history of building games. I think he said at one point over 100 million people has played his game or some of his games, but he builds gamulations now in their educational material, 2D interactive space that's delivered through a website. And we're partnering to be able to combine gamulations plus VR, where the gamulations would help build the instructional content and knowledge base, and then VR would be the test of those skills. And Kathy has been in the training atmosphere for a long time. And Colonel retired James Henderson is a DoD specialist, and he's helping us with our trying engagement with the phase 2 SBIR with the Air Force currently. And that's the Redmere Productions one that I was talking about. That's the partnership that is going to enhance our platform and make it not just a VR solution that is limited to headsets.
Yeah.
Hello?
Well, I was just going to add, Scott.
No worries, I can't see y'all.
Yeah, I was just going to add, going back to the Redmere partnership, when you look at what makes us distinct, one is we're not just technologists, licensed clinical psychologist, researcher, senior leaders who've trained large multi-thousand person organizations. And then, Redmere, who brings in his capability. And so you put that package together and it presents a pretty unique opportunity. And then we can leverage that across Redmere's market, which he's already established in. And so we think that's pretty important to emphasize the Redmere production partnership.
We did a competitive analysis on other companies. A lot of companies don't have the functionality that our platform does. We have voice recognition, or animations are custom. We have psychological profiles. Our simulations are more dynamic than other kind of trainings that I've been observing. Multiplayer is a function that most companies don't do. And the authoring tool as well is something that most companies don't have. And so in regards to the rest of the VR companies or platform-based companies that are out there, we are as competitive, if not more in some areas. And we'll be moving to build that competitive position with the next version of our platform. We have 10 active contracts right now with 3,000 users and 3 new custom projects that are moving forward. We have currently 16, actually now, as of today, 20 new leads in the pipeline at an estimated of 1.5 million. We have a DoD State Department contract that we're in negotiations with, which would deliver nursing training to 400 different locations around the world. Like Scott said, we're in 2 of the largest hospital systems, Aurora Health and Kaiser Permanente, and Allied Universal is one of the largest security companies in the world as well. So our traction is pretty strong. And the sales strategy, we have 4 sales partners currently. We have an advertising and marketing campaign and company that we're working through now. We have a lead generation company that's identified 76,000 new leads for us. We're currently doing a social media campaign in multiple media platforms. We always do research with our partners. Dr. Liz Reagan just released a publication on the impact the training has had on her staff. We have about a 95% customer retention, and that has not moved over the last 2 years, which is pretty good. And we have a low customer acquisition cost. Once we build a current environment or simulation, there's no additional cost of selling that. Our business model is business SaaS model and services, and it goes per seat. That can differ depending on the individuals you're talking to. For instance, municipalities, for some reason, don't like a seat conversation. They just like the line item budget conversation, but that's kind of how we develop the metrics on determining what that budget line item is for those departments. And as the seats increase, the cost of the seat decreases. Come on. Our 4-year projections, financial projections are this year, we should, I think it's estimated at 533% increase. And as part of the use of the funds is to build out more trainings and more kind of domains like workplace violence and the active shooter, hazmat and fire department, infectious disease trainings have been asked of us. And so part of the use of the fund is building out more of those trainings. And as we build them, the cost, the profit margin increases because we no longer need to put money into building that content. It's extremely scalable. Our product is adapted and evolves every time an individual purchases it. They always ask for something new. We are moving our mass casualty training from a start triage to now assault triage instructional design, and then we're including pediatrics in it. Pediatrics is one of the most difficult things for EMS and hospitals to train on, and so that's one of the requests. And so our products just keep evolving and getting better.
Great, Scott. I want to stop you there and make sure we have time for some questions here. So let's go ahead and start with Liam this time. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask.
Great, appreciate it, Shane. And thank you both for the awesome conversation. I'd love to understand how you're thinking about building a long-term moat here. What I've seen with other companies is selling to health systems has been very difficult. If you sell to one hospital, you've sold to one hospital. They're kind of very unique. And as VR gaming becomes commoditized, and 14-year-old kids are coming out with games, I'm assuming other people will tackle this market as well and reduce your margins. So how do you plan to build a proper moat that will take you out 5+ years?
Yeah, I think the intent is to transition from the content piece to the platform piece. And then all those individuals that are building content, they now can host in our platform, would be one of the objectives. Another objective is the CEU market. All of these individuals have to have annual CEUs, and to be able to get the CEU and the testing done in our platform would also extend that market as well.
Got it. Makes sense. And then what's the exit strategy?
To be acquired.
And what would be like an ideal acquirer?
There's 5 companies that I've found, large training companies, large e-learning management companies. A lot of, honestly, Liam, I've talked to a number of companies that have contacted us just to understand what it takes to build a VR platform. It was almost like a detective kind of thing. Can we do this? And most of them don't want to create an entire department doing this. And so what I believe, there's not an emergency management platform or disaster response platform, or even one that FEMA deploys, right? And so I think once you've acquired a large amount of that market, those corporations are going to want to acquire us. The average right now is about 50 million, is what I've been seeing on Crunchbase.
Shane, am I good for one more question, or
Yeah,
do we
we'll
gotta
just
switch to Zamir?
do one more quick question, and Zamir, we'll move over to you really quickly, and we'll wrap things up after that.
Great. So last question is timing. Why now? 2 years ago, I was diligencing a number of ed tech VR companies that were getting acquired. I think one of them actually was like a VR first responders shooting education tool. So a lot of people have already like placed their bets in this market, and things have kind of cooled off with the metaverse and the Facebook not being able to put legs in and walking and things like that. So is it too soon for the next wave of VR, or is now the right time?
Well, I think well, not in relation to the company that you're talking about. That was more of a police training type company, and we're on a different side of that market. But I think the metaverse, if you've ever been around in technology and gaming, Second Life was around too, right? And that died, and that's more entertainment driven. What we're finding in terms of just research related to training and education and learning, online learning, is becoming more problematic than ever. It's not efficient. It's not retaining the actual skill set that's required to perform. And as people are becoming more digitized, the access to more digitally enhanced training is what people are wanting. And so I think VR and gamulations and making training more attractive to the end user is extremely important. I don't think from what we've been seeing, people are wanting it. Every week we're getting hit with somebody that's interested.
Yeah, and I would just add to that the military example. While it seems like, for me, I think people were overly focused on the technology when it first started. Now, what's happened now is they've recognized that we have to figure out the strategy behind the technology. And so we spend a lot of time coaching senior leaders on how to integrate it as part of that comprehensive strategy. And you got to have both pieces. You have to have the technology and the training. We think that's what we offer through the service of consulting them on how do you actually integrate this into your organization to achieve those synergistic effects.
And then, like, if you could consider the human data that you would receive in eye tracking and physiological responses to content, you would understand staff and human performance more robustly than you could ever. That's ever been done, honestly. And that is another way to advance our company into the market and being able to tell a story. Because I think the amount of money that's spent on underperformance, losing staff, retention, it's pretty significant. And being able to identify strong employees, efficient employees, identifying where those employees should be in your organization. Companies spend millions of dollars trying to do that.
Great.
Great.
Thank you both.
Perfect. Zamir, if you have a quick question or two, we'll just end with you.
Yeah,
Go
I'll be
ahead.
quick. So starting 2018, together with my team, we built the largest EdTech accelerator in Eastern Europe. And we did 8 batches, and it was over 1,200 startups combined. Every batch we had 1 or 2 VR, AR educational companies. And the 2 large struggles that every one of those companies had, and I'll voice them, and then I'll be interested in how you plan to tackle that. One of the struggles is the penetration of the VR tech, right? And I posted a picture from Statista.
Mm-hmm.
The speed of which the amount of VR sets are being bought by single customers and by the corporations is pretty slow. Even though it's in dynamic in percent, it might look like something big, but right now, if you look at it, there's like 30 million devices worldwide. The second part of this problem, which is also connected to the hardware, in order to train people on premises of a corporation or a hospital or any other organization, they need to have a VR class set up, and that's a pretty expensive investment as well. Just to have the full class and have all of the equipment. So that's the hardware piece. Then there's the software piece, which is almost every client requires some kind of a customization of the educational program for them, for their facility, for their staff, for their internal rules, et cetera, et cetera. So 2 pieces of the puzzle that are preventing startups to scale fast,
Mhm.
unfortunately. So I'm very interested. What are you thinking about these bottlenecks, how you believe you can address them, and how you believe you can scale fast,
Mhm.
considering those two factors?
So let's just stick with the hardware. We are addressing some of the hardware barriers by adding game emulations and web VR so that the platform is not just VR specific, right? So that training can be delivered in different modalities. The prevalence of the headsets is increasing, but it's not as fast as you said. But we are working and creating solutions. Just for instance, like I think the assumption is that everybody has to have a headset for this to work. And that's not the case. And it's not the case that we're finding. We have a gentleman who is training 1,500 employees right now on 5 headsets. And those are mobile. They're checking them out. They also have companies that rent headsets. And so in some of the universities that we're working with, instead of having these $150 to $200 books that none of the students read, they have that as part of their student fees. So it's not as fast as it could be or needs to be, but it is moving, and we're creating solutions around that. In the VR classrooms, we haven't had a need. They're not doing the whole cave. They're not doing the projections. You know what I mean? Is that what you mean by the classroom?
Yeah, like a
Like what
special
my lab
facility.
looks like.
Yeah, like a lab, like a special facility where they would take
Yeah,
like
some
20 people at a
departments
time,
are, like-
train them.
Yeah, some departments are like EMS and fire that have budgets. Harvard, Mass General has one, but they're really having a room with 3 or 4 headsets in it and training through, like that's Advocate Christ Chicago. They have just a 10 by 10 room. Individuals come and train in it, and over the last 3 months, they've trained 350 people. So there are workarounds to some of those barriers, and we're growing and understanding what those are and developing strategies for those. What was the other one, Zamir?
The customization of the content. Like,
So what we find that actually helps with that, Zamir, is that actually builds our offering tool. Right. So every time, like they spent $50,000 on the mass casualty product, right? I can go and resell that to all the hospitals that have already sold it to. Kaiser Permanente wanted to add salt to it, right? We've talked to UK EMS, they want salt. There are other people that want salt.
let me ask you a quick question though. When
Yeah.
they pay you, do you owe the IP rights for the content, or do they buy the rights for that content once they pay you?
We own that. It depends on it. Like Allied Universal works with Vistalar, right? Which is a training company for workplace violence. They own the rights for that. But with our partnership as a channel sales partner, we don't have to do the licensing fee. So each kind of interaction is a little bit different.
Just for the sake of time, a short comment on the revenue side. I seen that in 4 years, you plan to have 2.5 million in revenues. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the projection.
So from the venture standpoint, that would be not ambitious enough.
Okay.
So venture investors would like to see at least 3x growth annually for for the revenues, which would help your overall valuations to grow faster.
Right.
So maybe look at that one more time together with your team and see if there's a realistic plan on scaling how those revenues can be much higher, because 2.5 million, I would assume that would be there like in 18-24 months, and then you would triple it, and then you would triple it again. I mean,
yeah, that was without the investment.
Oh, okay.
But I hear you. The trick is overinflating, just to get you interested too.
Yeah, and Zamir, what I would say, and I so appreciate your counsel, because it's interesting to hear about your previous experiences. The one thing I would add and just reinforce is, guys, we have not found a single large American business yet where this technology is pervasive. And DoD is the best example. The U.S. State Department reached out to us. It's because they do not have enterprise solutions. And so right now, regardless of what's happened, the market is proving that there is a demand signal, and it's not going away. It's only increasing. And we've got more leads now than we have ever had. So I just think it was a matter of timing. some things had to coalesce, the technology, the hardware, the price point, and the market demand and understanding of the capabilities. And it seems like that's beginning to coalesce now. And that's why we're optimistic from talking to customers on a weekly basis, big customers.
Great.
Thanks,
That'll
Amir. I
take us-
appreciate that.
Yeah, that'll take us to the end of our show. So I want to thank you guys. Thank our audience for joining us, and especially our investor panels for taking time out of your day. We'll be following up with everybody with the recording and all that good stuff. My investors, I'll follow up with you individually as well to see what next steps we should take. And with that, again, I want to thank everybody, and we'll go ahead and close it out now.
Great. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.